What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. In this video I want to talk to you about something really important that you have to do with your winch before you go out and use it in an emergency situation. So what you have to do is you have to spool up your winch under load. So I got my 2021 Chevy Silverado Trail Boss and I'm out here in a state forest in Pennsylvania, north central Pennsylvania. Pitch black right now. Days are getting short, so couldn't do it during the day. And what I'm doing is I have my winch rope hooked up to a tree here, this big oak tree, and I'm spooling up the winch under tension. And the reason why you want to spool it up under tension, because if you actually have to use the winch and you didn't spool up the rope under tension, what'll happen is as you're pulling yourself in with the winch, the rope will dig into itself and it can either damage the rope or cause a jam. So you don't want to damage your rope because that can be catastrophic, especially with a steel rope. If you have a steel rope and steel equipment like D-ring shackles, if you have a fray in your rope, it could break and you could have a piece of metal fly back at you. So that can happen if you don't spool up your winch properly under tension. What'll happen is the rope will dig into itself and it could cause frays and kinks. You don't want a kink. A kink will damage the structural integrity of the rope, whether it's steel or synthetic. So what's really critical is the first two wraps, okay? The first two wraps of rope on the spool. You want those to be as tight as possible. Preferably all of the wraps should be tight, but especially the first two wraps and the first three wraps, depending on what kind of winch you have and the capacity and the length of the rope. But the first two wraps are essential to have those really tightly spooled. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I have my truck in neutral. You never want to use a winch with your transmission in gear because you can damage the transmission. So I have the transmission in neutral. I have the parking brake set. And what I'm doing is I am very slowly, inch by inch, pulling myself towards that tree with the transmission in neutral and my foot very lightly pressed on the brakes. Okay, not all the way down on the brakes, because then it's just going to put unnecessary strain on the winch and everything else. So I just have my foot on the brake like halfway or quarter of the way, just enough to keep this rope tight at all times. Okay, you want this rope to be tight so the winch is pulling basically the entire weight of the truck, okay? And that will make sure that the rope is tightly spooled, okay? So ideally, if you have a friend that can help you, that's gonna make your life a lot easier, because you have to make sure as you're doing this that the rope wraps itself nice and neat, okay? It's very possible that you can have the rope wrap over itself sometimes, and then you gotta carefully, very carefully reverse. You gotta let out some rope and carefully reverse and do it again. You wanna make sure that the rope is neatly spooling itself. You see how it's very neat and tight? That's what you want. Okay, so you gotta inch by inch, very slowly, very carefully winch yourself in. Your foot is on the brake about halfway or maybe a quarter of the way. And when you have to stop and get out to check if the rope is spooling itself properly and it's not wrapping over itself, what you want to do is set the parking brake, okay? Not put the truck in park, okay? The transmission in park. You want to set the parking brake. Never put your truck or your Jeep in gear while you're using a winch, okay? Keep it in neutral, because you can destroy your transmission. So as you see, I have it pretty good. I'm on the third wrap right now. Also very important, when you're starting your first wrap, you want to make sure you have at least 5 to 7 turns on the spool. Okay, you don't want to pull the rope all the way out and then start winching yourself in, because you can actually tear the rope off of the spool. So you want to leave like 5 to 8 coils, I guess. I don't know what the proper word is. Okay, like 5 to 8 wraps or coils. I don't know how to say it, but basically, you know, the rope is wrapped around 8 times the first layer, the first main wrap. Okay, and then what you're going to want to do when you have those 5 to 7 coils or wraps, you then want to depress the brake pedal all the way down and winch yourself in, and make sure that those first 5 to 8 coils are super duper tight. Okay, because those are critical. If those are loose and you start winching yourself in, you can literally tear the rope right off the spool. And I'm just checking my back here to make sure there's no bears, because I just saw a huge pile of bear scat, and it's early October, so they're on the move, and it's a cool night tonight. But first few coils, you want to tighten those up, okay, and then start doing what I said until you get at least the first 2 wraps really tight and really neat. Okay, that's what you want, just like that. And basically just work your way in all the way until you reach your winch point. The last wrap doesn't have to be tight. It's really the first 2 to 3 wraps that are most critical to winch in under load. Okay, so I'm going to continue to do this now, and you just go real slow. Keep your door open so you can see if you're actually moving, if you're actually winching yourself in while you're doing this. Okay, and a little bit about the truck. If you don't know about my truck, I have 34 by 12 inch tires. These are Nitto trail grapplers. They're actually 295/70 R18. I got Method bead grip wheels. I have some last fit off-road lights, spotlights and ditch lights. I have Diode Dynamics floodlights. I have this Steelcraft bumper, and I have some performance mods under the hood. This thing is pushing out around 450 to 500 horsepower with some intake mods and a custom tune. I have dynoed it. But I will be doing more off-road content just like this. So check out my off-road and truck playlist for all of my off-road and truck videos. But I'm going to jump in the truck and I'm going to winch myself in and continue the process and show you guys how I do it. All right, guys, so it's a little bit hard to see the rope with the camera, but I have my door open so I can check and look and see if my truck is actually being pulled in, or if I'm just pulling against the brakes. And if I'm pulling against the brakes and the truck is not really moving too much, then I want to release a little bit of pressure on the brake pedal. You just need a little bit of pressure on the brake pedal, just enough to keep that rope tight so it's under tension the whole time. Another thing too is you want to do this on a grassy surface. Don't do it on asphalt, because you can damage something on your truck. Okay, there's a lot of force being applied by the winch, and you know, if you're pushing your brake pedals down, it's just better to do it on grass. There's more room for error. Okay, if something happens, it'll drag the truck on slippery grass rather than hard pavement. So I'm going to start winching in a little bit. You know, you're just doing it very, very little, inch by inch. Okay. It's good to have a wireless remote when you're doing this. Ideally, if you have a buddy, that's the best case scenario. Okay, you see how little moving? Look, literally just a few inches at a time. That's what you're doing the whole time, keeping it under tension. Okay, it's hard to show you, but the rope is under tension the whole time. If you look closely, you'll see the rope there is under tension the entire time. So that's pretty much it, guys. This is what you're going to do until you coil the whole thing up. And the last wrap is not critical to be under tension. It's the first few wraps that are the most critical, because you're going to have all that pressure. The rope is going to dig into itself, and if it's not coiled tight, you're going to have problems. You're going to damage your rope. You're going to jam up the winch. So you don't want to be in that situation when you're in an emergency and you really have to use your winch and then you break it. So that's pretty much it for this one, guys. Take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 P's: prepare, practice, and persevere.